If you're a regular viewer of the channel, then you're probably aware that a lot of the stories we cover include some element of mystery or suspense. Clues need to be searched for, evidence needs to be painstakingly tested, and witnesses need to be interviewed. Well, this week, we decided we would take a bit of a departure from all of that and cover a bunch of cases we've been sitting on for a while, where police more or less had their jobs done for them by the actual criminals. These are instances where, whether through bad luck, stupidity, or something else entirely, the perpetrators essentially caught themselves. Just before we get to today's stories, a reminder that if you find our videos interesting and informative, to like and subscribe for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel, and if you've watched a few of our videos already, you might not even realize that you're not subscribed. While you're there, don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. With that out of the way, here are 8 hilarious ways criminals busted themselves. At around 6:30 a.m. on Mother's Day of 2015, police in Livingston County, New York, received a call about a burglary at a restaurant called Build-A-Burger and Ice Cream. The restaurant is located in the small town of Mount Morris, roughly an hour's drive east of Buffalo. When officers arrived at the scene, they discovered that the culprits had gained entry by smashing the glass on one of the business's doors. The cash register was missing, along with the restaurant's video surveillance system, which had been completely ripped out. Given the thieves' apparent foresight to try and remove evidence of the crime taking place, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this would be a tough case for the Livingston County Sheriff's Office to crack. And it very well might have been, if it weren't for the final thing that the burglars had chosen to steal: a 10-pound bowl of the restaurant's macaroni salad. You see, while the criminals had been careful not to leave a digital trail behind, they were decidedly less careful when it came to leaving a physical one. In a twist that sounds like it was lifted directly from the pages of Hansel and Gretel, police soon spotted a trail of macaroni salad which led away from the crime scene. Eventually, this trail also began to include items such as rubber gloves, loose change, the restaurant's smashed cash register, and even a piece of the stolen surveillance system. At the end of the trail were the 3 burglary suspects: 34-year-old Matthew Sepetko, 35-year-old James Marullo, and 23-year-old Timothy Walker Jr. It turned out that after the burglary at the Build-A-Burger, the 3 men had been unable to wait to dig into their stolen 10-pound bowl of macaroni. Each of the men had taken turns eating from the bowl while still trying to carry the other stolen goods and flee the area. Hence, the sloppy trail of macaroni salad. As if things couldn't get any more amusing, the men had prioritized the macaroni so much over the other things that they had taken that when it became too laborious to carry all the heavy stuff that they had taken, they ditched the other items rather than getting rid of the food. Perhaps they thought this was worth it, though, as the cash register they stole reportedly only contained a measly $29 in change. When police caught up with Sepetko, Marullo, and Walker, all 3 of them were taken into custody and subsequently charged with burglary, criminal mischief, and grand larceny. Walker was also charged with possession of a controlled substance and a hypodermic instrument. While Build-A-Burger's owner, Debbie Hill, ended up losing out on a whole day of business due to the burglary and investigation, reports at the time state that she was a remarkably good sport about the whole thing. Describing her perceived silver lining of the case to reporters, she said, quote, "Obviously it must be good macaroni salad if they took the whole 10 pounds of it." According to local reports we came across, Matthew Sepetko was ultimately sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison for his participation in the crime, James Marullo was sentenced to 2 to 4 years, and Timothy Walker Jr. was sentenced to 1 to 3 years. While you might think that passing a hold-up note to a bank teller is one of the most basic parts of any bank robbery, apparently there are still some criminals who manage to screw it up. Namely, one Illinois man who seemingly forgot that the goal of any successful robbery is to not get caught. According to reports, back in December of 2008, 40-year-old Thomas Infante walked into a Fifth Third bank in Chicago, intending to rob the place. It was about 10 minutes before closing time on a Friday, and Infante walked up to one of the bank tellers, handing her a note that read, quote, "Be quick, be quit. Give your cash or I'll shoot." The understandably terrified employee proceeded to give Infante about $400, and he went on his way, leaving behind his threatening note. Unbeknownst to the newly minted bank robber, however, he had made a glaring oversight when it came to that note, one that was far more consequential than his misspelling of the word quiet. Infante had written the hold-up note used in the robbery on the back of a torn piece of paper that turned out to be one of his pay stubs. When police arrived at the scene, they quickly realized what Infante had done. They also managed to find the other half of the 40-year-old's torn pay stub, which was pretty easy since he had just thrown it outside of the bank's front doors. On it were Infante's full name and home address. Thanks to surveillance footage and witness accounts, police first decided to follow up on Infante's whereabouts at a residence roughly 2 blocks from the scene of the crime. There, they interviewed the 40-year-old's brother, who said that Infante had been there earlier and had left behind a brown jacket. Police recognized the jacket from the video footage taken by the bank security cameras. A short time later, police paid a visit to the address on Infante's pay stub, which was reportedly somewhere in the village of Cary, Illinois. He was arrested and apparently later confessed to the crime. Speaking about the incident at the time, FBI spokesman Ross Rice told the Chicago Tribune that the agency sees a lot of strange bank robberies, but that, quote, "It's fairly unusual that we see something that specifically stupid." On a spring day in 2013, an officer from Missouri's Clayton Police Department initiated what he likely assumed would be a routine vehicle stop near the intersection of Forsyth Boulevard and Central Avenue. It was just after 2 in the afternoon, and the vehicle's driver, later identified as 39-year-old Joseph Meacham, had reportedly committed a minor traffic violation. However, when the officer asked Meacham to step out of his car and began walking towards him, Meacham suddenly pushed him out of the way and began to run as fast as he could. Over the next several minutes, Meacham apparently ran along both Forsyth Boulevard and Central Avenue, evidently hoping to lose the officer who was now understandably chasing him. Unable to throw him off his trail, it was then that Meacham tried a new tactic, running into the first building he saw in order to try and find a hiding place. Unfortunately, if Meacham's goal was to escape the police, he couldn't have done a worse job vetting his new hiding place, as it just so happened that the building he had run into was the headquarters of the St. Louis County Police. Not realizing this until it was far too late, Meacham apparently proceeded to run around inside the building like a startled animal, changing directions every time he would see a uniformed officer and running down random halls until he went down one that was a dead end. Seemingly sensing that this was the end, it was at this point that Meacham curled up into a ball on the floor. Police at the station would later say he appeared to be acting as though, if he couldn't see them, they couldn't see him either. This, of course, was not the case, and as the initially confused officers at the police headquarters were joined by their fellow officer from the Clayton PD who had originally been chasing Meacham, they were quickly filled in on the situation. The 39-year-old was subsequently arrested. While reports we came across were light on details as to what initially prompted the bizarre chase, many of them stated that Meacham smelled of alcohol at the time that he was arrested. According to these same reports, he was issued several tickets, as well as a court summons for unspecified charges, and was later released. The evening of February 25th, 2013, started out like any other for Brianna Priddy. The 24-year-old was working her normal Monday shift as a server at an Applebee's restaurant in Lakewood, Colorado, when a group of 4 people were seated in her section. It was a party of 3 men and 1 woman. As she normally would with any table, Brianna asked if the group wanted to start off with any drinks. They all said yes and gave their orders, with the woman asking for a margarita. Brianna thought the woman looked a little young and asked to see some ID to make sure she was of legal drinking age. Again, pretty standard practice. However, it was at this point that the entire situation took a completely unexpected turn, as when the woman handed over a driver's license, Brianna saw her own photo staring back at her. It was her license. It turns out that nearly 2 weeks earlier, Brianna had been at a friend's house when her wallet was stolen. Inside had been nearly $500 in cash, as well as her bank and credit cards and all of her ID, including her driver's license. Brianna had of course reported the theft. However, neither she nor the police had been optimistic about the prospect of getting her possessions back. Now, it seemed that the culprit had been either brazen or reckless enough to hand her back her own ID. Careful not to give away that she noticed anything amiss, Brianna put on her best fake smile and calmly left the table under the guise of fulfilling their drink orders. Then, she went straight to her managers to explain the situation and called the police. Thankfully, officers arrived in decent time and were able to place the female suspect under arrest. When they searched the car that she and the rest of the group had arrived in, they found drugs, drug paraphernalia, and Brianna's student ID. While stories at the time unfortunately state that neither Brianna's wallet or her missing cash were found, at least she got some amount of justice for the crime. The woman was subsequently slapped with a misdemeanor drug possession charge, as well as 3 felony charges for theft, identity theft, and criminal impersonation. Though we unfortunately don't know the female suspect's name because reports withheld it at the time, they did provide one last hilarious tidbit about her that makes the case even more bizarre. Apparently, the woman was 26 years old, meaning there was really no reason for her to use Brianna's ID in the first place because she was well above legal drinking age. While authorities at the time said that they were baffled as to why the woman hadn't simply used her own ID, a spokesman for the Lakewood Police Department summed it up this way, saying, quote, "Dumb criminal. That's the first thing that comes to mind." In September of 2013, 2 men from Rotherham, England, pulled off what they evidently thought was a brilliant crime. After borrowing a friend's car one night and claiming that they were going out for cigarettes, 25-year-old Ashley Keast and 27-year-old Anthony Hunt instead went to a residence in the nearby village of Brinsworth, where they knew that the homeowners would be away on holiday. They forced open the rear patio door to the property, made their way inside, and grabbed whatever electronics, jewelry, and other items of value they could find before finally taking off in the victim's Audi A4. All in all, they made off with about £27,000 worth of stolen goods, which at the time would have translated to roughly $42,000 US. While police would soon find the stolen Audi crashed and abandoned, the burglars' joyride wouldn't be the only part of the crime to be short-lived, as just days later, Keast managed to give away the entire plot with one reckless photo. You see, when Keast began using the victim's cell phone that he had stolen, he had the foresight to take out the SIM card and replace it with his own. But he never went as far as to erase the downloaded content and settings from the phone's rightful owner. So when he posted a rather brazen photo of himself at the scene of the crime, he also unwittingly shared it with several of the victim's contacts through the messaging application known as WhatsApp. These contacts promptly notified police, who recognized Keast and were able to subsequently place him and Hunt under arrest. Fortunately, while several of the victims' stolen items, such as their car, were damaged beyond repair, police did manage to recover at least some of their possessions from Keast's residence. This included a Rolex watch worth an estimated £4,000, or about $6,300 US at the time. Hunt was later sentenced to 18 months in prison for his role in the crime, while Keast, who was already in breach of a previously suspended sentence, was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months. Ridiculously, this still wasn't quite the end of the story for Keast, as while researching this case, we discovered that after being arrested, the 25-year-old decided it would be a good idea to send a letter to the victim of the burglary threatening to kill him. Keast was found guilty of witness intimidation and attempting to pervert the course of justice, and was sentenced to a further 4 years in prison. With this next story, it's hard to say whether it was more so that the bank robber was super gullible, or whether the bank teller was just really that quick-witted. Perhaps it's a mixture of both. Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Anyway, on June 4th, 2018, a man walked into a Huntington bank in Columbus, Ohio, and handed a note across the counter to the teller. The note demanded that the teller hand over money and stated that the man was armed. As per the bank's procedure in this kind of situation, the teller promptly handed over a stack of cash to the robber, who immediately demanded more. He said that he wanted the money from the, quote, electronic cash recycle machine in the bank's lobby. Reports aren't clear about what this machine was exactly, though some just say it was a standard ATM. In either case, the demand reportedly gave the bank teller an idea. Making sure to keep absolutely calm and collected, the teller explained that they would be happy to get the robber the cash from the machine, but there was just one problem. It required a driver's license to actually dispense the cash. This was a lie, of course, but amazingly, the man obliged, handing over his own driver's license. That's when the teller was able to identify him as 51-year-old David Menser. Police were able to catch up with Menser almost 2 weeks later on June 15th, when he was taken into custody without incident. Believe it or not, despite falling for a seemingly obvious trick, according to Columbus police, he was a serial bank robber who had allegedly pulled off 4 other heists in the local area around that time. The 51-year-old was initially charged with aggravated robbery and threatening with a deadly weapon, though was ultimately convicted on multiple counts of robbery, some of which were second-degree charges and some of which were third-degree. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison and is projected to be released sometime in 2024. While this next criminal didn't technically give himself away to police, we decided to bend the rules of our list a bit because he arguably managed to seal his fate in an equally consequential and amusing way, after he admitted to the crime he had committed in open court. Back in June of 1985, 47-year-old Dennis Newton was arrested in connection with 3 armed robberies at Circle K convenience stores in Oklahoma City. Police caught on to Newton's crime spree after witnesses had given a description of his car, which police had spotted outside of his apartment complex. He was placed under surveillance for several days, until finally he committed a minor traffic violation on the road, which officers used as grounds to pull him over and search his car. Inside, police found several rounds of ammunition and a gun holster, and Newton was charged with multiple counts of armed robbery. When the time came for Newton's first trial in October of that year, which was in connection with the first robbery he was accused of, he immediately started things off on an interesting note. He fired his court-appointed public defendant and refused to take part in jury selection, after the judge in the case ruled that he would be allowed to represent himself. Though the trial apparently got off to a rough start, with the judge cautioning Newton about his cross-examination of one of the witnesses in the case, and him replying that he was, quote, being railroaded by a kangaroo court, the assistant district attorney would later say that for someone who wasn't a trained lawyer, Newton actually managed to put on a fairly credible defense. Unfortunately, however, he then managed to blow the whole case with one ridiculous outburst. This was even more laughable because by this time he had actually rehired his public defender, so in principle, all he should have had to do was sit there and remain silent. The incident began when the Circle K manager, Darlene Danner, took the stand on behalf of the prosecution. Since she was their witness, they got to question her first, after which the defense would be given an opportunity to cross-examine. However, during the middle of a routine line of questioning, Newton apparently lost his cool, got up in the middle of the court, and started shouting at Danner. We can't repeat exactly what he said because of the profanity, so we'll use the word blank in place of the expletives. After standing up in front of the whole court, Newton yelled, quote, "You lying blank. I should have blown your blanking head off." After a brief pause, Newton reportedly realized what he had done and tried to save the situation, following up with, quote, "If I'd been the one that was there." At the close of the trial, the jury took just 20 minutes to convict Newton, and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Before we get to the last case on today's list, we decided to include a couple of honorable, or I guess in this case, dishonorable mentions. These were stories where we either weren't able to confirm all of the details, or where we felt there just wasn't enough to make a whole segment. So, take these ones with a bit more skepticism. First up is the story of an 18-year-old in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who in 2003 was caught shoplifting after the alarm went off at a clothing store he was stealing from. It turned out that the teenager had remembered to remove the security tags from the stolen clothing, but for some reason had then stashed these tags in his pockets before attempting to walk out. Second, and also from 2003, is a story about a 33-year-old man from Des Moines, Iowa, named William Klein Jr. Apparently, during a bit of Father's Day fun, Klein's 10-year-old son had handcuffed himself to his dad as a show of affection, using the handcuffs that Klein had from his security job. Evidently, it had been a while since Klein had used the handcuffs, since he and his family soon discovered that the keys were missing. Trapped, they called the police, hoping they could get help. Officers were more than happy to oblige, until during a routine background check, when they realized that Klein had 2 warrants out for his arrest. Though Klein was quickly let out of his own handcuffs, unfortunately for him, it was only so that police could slap a pair of their own on him, and he was taken away. Finally, to round out our dishonorable mentions, we've got the story of a Scottish shoplifter named Aaron Morrison, who was allegedly arrested after stealing a bottle of vodka from a liquor store. How was he caught? According to reports, after stealing the booze, on the way out, he stopped to give his name and number to a store clerk who he thought was attractive, asking her out on a date. We should say that of all the stories on this part of our list, though, we're the least sure about the accuracy of this one, as while it appeared on numerous sites we came across in our research, none of them were actual news sites. Like we said, though, take it with a grain of salt. The final story on today's list is not only our personal favorite, but is also the one that inspired this video's theme. We came across this one quite a while ago, but didn't really know what to do with it until now. Anyway, we hope you find it as ridiculous as we did. In the early morning hours of July 8th, 2018, police in the city of Vancouver, Washington, received a frantic phone call from a man named Rye Wardlaw. He claimed that his house was being burglarized, and that he managed to escape, but he needed help. Immediately, things didn't quite add up about Wardlaw's story. Despite apparently being the victim of a robbery, he claimed that he was trapped inside a business at a local strip mall, and when asked where his house was, proceeded to give police a phony address. Deciding to cut out the middleman, police simply traveled to the strip mall where Wardlaw initially claimed he was. In particular, to an escape room business called Northwest Escape Experience. For those unfamiliar, escape rooms are a kind of immersive puzzle game that are usually designed to be played with a small group of people. Participants are placed inside of a locked, normally windowless room that is full of puzzles and clues that the group must solve within a limited time to try and escape the room. To make things more immersive and exciting, many escape rooms are also built around a central theme. Anyway, it was inside one of these businesses where Wardlaw now found himself trapped. You see, it turned out that while there was in fact a burglary in progress that morning, it wasn't at Wardlaw's house. He was the burglar and had run into trouble after breaking into Northwest Escape Experience. At the beginning of the burglary, Wardlaw had made his way in through the back door, after which he walked around a bit and stole a cell phone, television remote, and beer from an employee fridge. The only problem was that Wardlaw had then forgotten how he had gotten in, and unable to figure out the lock on the business's front door, had proceeded to get lost and confused in some of the puzzle rooms. During this time, he called 911 no less than 4 times to ask police for help. Hilariously, Wardlaw did eventually figure out how to escape the escape room business, though this was after he had placed his frantic 911 calls. While we don't know exactly why Wardlaw placed so many calls, one of the reports we came across pointed out that at the time of the incident, one of Northwest Escape Experience's themed rooms was designed to look like a, quote, serial killer's basement hideout. The room featured a steel autopsy table, a fake dead body, and a workbench full of gruesome tools. Since we know that Wardlaw broke in through the back of the business, it's possible that he didn't actually know what he was walking into, and may have panicked after seeing this puzzle room, which at the time was called the Kill Room. Of course, that's all pure speculation on our part, so make of it what you will. In any case, Wardlaw was spotted by police throwing away the stolen cell phone while still on the strip mall's property shortly after officers arrived, and was placed under arrest. He was later slapped with a second-degree burglary charge, though unfortunately we could not find any follow-up information relating to his conviction or sentencing. While the couple who owned Northwest Escape Experience, Rob and Tamara Bertrand, said that they were upset by the crime, especially because of the amount of damage that was done to their property since they're just a small business, even they were able to have a bit of a laugh given the bizarre circumstances. In one of the reports we came across, they remarked, quote, "We're proud to say we're the only escape room in the Northwest that has a 100% capture rate of criminals." That brings us to the end of today's list. To be honest, we actually came across quite a few more cases like this during our research, so if you found today's video interesting and would like to hear more about these strange stories, be sure to let us know in the comments section below. Be sure to also let us know if you know of any stories like this that you'd like to see covered in a future video. While you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. And as always, thank you for watching.